Joining me now around the table, Chad Sweet. He's a former CIA officer and current CEO of the Chertoff Group. And Richard Abulafia, Vice President of Analysis at the Teal Group and an expert on the Boeing 777. Let me start here. What are you picking up in terms of the intelligence community? I mean, by and large, I'm getting doesn't look like terrorism. And I think it's the biggest thing of all. Nobody said, hey, we did this.
Well, 2 points. I'm actually getting signals to the opposite, that there is certainly signals of potential foul play. And I think in terms of the no claim of responsibility, Candy, there are a couple of scenarios where we may not have seen a claim of responsibility yet. One would be if all the members of the terrorist cell were on the plane itself, and we saw something unfold like we did in United 93, where the passengers and crew actually overtook the terrorist and ultimately the plane crashed, you wouldn't have a claim of responsibility. Two other scenarios might be where the cell went beyond the aircraft, but they didn't believe that they accomplished the mission, so they don't want to claim credit yet. The third is that the plane landed elsewhere and the plot hasn't fully unfolded yet. So there's a variety of scenarios, Candy, where the lack of a claim of responsibility doesn't conclusively prove that this is not terrorism.
Yeah, and I think as Barbara alluded to, when there's no proof of anything, almost anything seems possible. Let me talk to you about the 777, and I have a couple of questions. First of all, is it true that you would have to actively turn off these communication systems? I think maybe you were the one that said that would be like accidentally hotwiring a car.
Yeah, you know, the ACAR system, basically you'd have to rummage around, find the circuit breaker, rip it out. Transponder can be turned off. It's a deliberate turning off, like you know what you're doing.
You could just hit it, or...
That's exactly right, you know. But the ACAR system, yeah, you have to really actively rummage around and decide to remove that.
And on that point, I do think that if we go back and look at 9/11, 3 of the 4 aircraft that were used had their transponders turned off. And I think what we've seen time and time again is terrorists are using this as part of their core playbook. They are obsessed with aviation as one of the threat vectors. And it does raise the issue, no matter what happens here, no matter what we find, this is a teachable moment where we've identified a vulnerability that needs to be addressed. And the question has to be asked, if you're flying an aircraft over a certain weight with a certain number of passengers, should it be the case that you cannot manually disable the transponders? There's some safety issues that have to be addressed there, but it's an important counterterrorism question that has to be answered.
I agree. And tell me about the data boxes, which we've always called the black boxes, but the data boxes which basically would tell us recordings in the cockpit, because we know that U.S. officials are looking at the cockpit saying somebody that knew something about this plane did these things deliberately. Could they have also messed with the data box and the voice boxes?
When it comes to the emergency locator transmitter and the voice recorder, you can mess around with that, yes. But on the other hand, you should have recording for up to 2 hours of what happened in the cockpit. Now, one possibility is they left it on, kept flying, in which case it might be erased by just mere noise. That would be unfortunate.
So it is possible they could find those at some point and not have the information that we're all trying to figure out at this point.
Right. If they flew for 3 hours after whatever struggle took place, if indeed there was a struggle, then it's possible they just find noise.
About reinforced doors, is that strictly a U.S. requirement? I thought the whole thing after 9/11 was make it so you cannot get into the cockpit. And is there a possibility that someone did get into the cockpit and force these pilots?
You're touching on a really important point, because post 9/11, we have implemented a number of security provisions that are in agreement with the ICAO and other international organizations to reinforce the cockpit. But at the core assumption of that is pilots are in the trusted inner circle. And what we've seen in the case of the 1999 Egyptian suicide flight by the pilot, as well as what we may see here, which is all fingers are pointing right now. If you look at the pilot had a simulator in his house, there are a number of indicators that would suggest that whoever did this knew how to disable the transponders and did it precisely at the moment of handoff between air traffic control.
That's time when people might not have noticed right away.
Correct. So this is, you're touching on, no matter how much we reinforce the cockpit door, we may have to ask the question of, do we need additional screening of both psychological as well as the security of the pilot themselves?
Is there any way to know whether this particular 777 had a reinforced door?
It's believed that it was, yeah.
So it did have a reinforced door. Mm-hmm. And by that, not just the flight attendant standing there with the, you know, the drink cart.
Right.
It had a door that you actually were not supposed to be able to get into.
That's right. But of course, you've still got two people inside and a lot of people outside. And it's not just the possibility that they're bad guys inside, it's also the possibility that they might be coerced by actions taking place outside of the cockpit
I've got
door.
the flight attendant and a gun and
Exactly.
all of that. So the question about the 777, if you looked at all the things that we're told happened, the transponders go dead, no more voice contact, turning off the communication system, is there any way for that to happen by a failure of something on the plane? For the things that we know that did happen, have been something that failed on the plane that would cause all those things to happen?
Absolutely not. There are simply too many backup systems. This wouldn't happen just by accident.
And that's what I would say too, Candy, is that before there's been rightfully a lot of caution over not overly asserting that this is some sort of foul play or terrorism, but I think there's enough preponderance of evidence, too much, as Rich said, coincidental information, that the preponderance of the proof, the burden of proof is shifting now from those who would argue that it's simply an accident to those who have been, to those who have been arguing it's not terrorism, to those who have said it is.
And we should say you were a huge supporter of the 777. You believe it's the perfect plane and all of that. So you see no way any accident could have caused any of this.
Absolutely not. And of course, the track record of the jet speaks for itself. You've got an extraordinary 19-year service record with about 1,200 jets in service. They're about 14–15% of world capacity, trillions of seat miles flown, and absolutely no fatalities associated with the design of the jet.
So when you look at this, it sounds to me like you're both looking at a human, somebody inside that cockpit did something to cause this plane to veer, and maybe ran out of gas, maybe it was a suicide mission, something like that.
Correct. And I think what we'll have to see in the coming days is on the voice recorder, the black box, there's an underwater beacon that will last for about 30 days for depths up to 14,000 feet. So the search and rescue that will take place now, we have about 30 days to get it right, and it's a huge amount of area to cover. If this plane did land in some other location, there are about 600+ airports that it could have landed, but we'll focus in on the ones that are likely privately controlled where you could land without being detected.
Okay, we're going to have you both on a little later in the hour, so please don't go anywhere, but thanks for now, Chad Sweet, Richard Abulafia.